He's the unbeaten former champion of the UFC's lightweight division and one of the biggest stars the sport of mixed martial arts has ever known. But as much as the majority of the people have no problem with Khabib Nurmagomedov, that doesn't mean that his fellow fighters feel the same way. Sure, some of them might be jealous, but for this video, we're going to give you a better idea of why UFC fighters hate Khabib. Number 10. A pullout merchant. Though he certainly made it to the octagon with a lot more regularity as his career progresses, the earlier years of Khabib's rise were dodged by several inquiries and health problems that left him as a less than reliable opponent for his fellow fighters. Just ask Tony Ferguson how frustrating it is to be tied to him, especially during the infamous tiramisu incident during the botched weight cut that saw us deprived of this matchup once again. In truth, that fight, or lack thereof, was a crazy time in the sport, and Tony himself was responsible for 2 of the 5 canceled matchups they had. But when Conor McGregor was asked about a future battle with Nurmagomedov prior to their eventual clash in 2018, the labeling of the Eagle as a pullout merchant was not as far from the truth as Khabib's fans were willing to admit at the time.
It was a good performance. I mean, what he was talking as well was, look, he's fought once in 8 years. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, he ain't fight too frequent for my liking. Like, for me to commit to something like that, I need to be solid proof that people are going to show up, and he's a consistent pull-out merchant.
His run as lightweight champion saw him carve out a run of consistency, of course, but for a time, this was a reputation that followed Nurmagomedov constantly. Number 9. His early retirement. They say that the hardest thing about being a champion is defending your belt against your own generation before then facing the young, hungry contenders that come afterwards. And though no one can deny just how good Khabib looked against his contemporaries, he never proved that his approach would be successful against the newer breed of athletes. Those guys that rose through the sport preparing for an eventual clash with this lightweight legend. By the time he hung up his gloves for good, Khabib had only defended his title 3 times, against fighters who were of the same generation that he was. And when you think about it, this is a major factor that sets the likes of John Jones, George St. Pierre, and Demetrius Johnson apart from him. Or at least you can understand how some of his fellow fighters might see it that way. Number 8. His UFC 229 antics. It was the biggest event in MMA history, the most watched UFC show to have ever taken place. And Khabib had just done enough to become the undeniable winner of the night. The sport as a whole were forced to sit back in awe of his dominant and destructive victory over Conor McGregor. And all things considered, Khabib had enjoyed the perfect night. So when he decided to take things to another level entirely and vault over the side of the octagon to attack Conor's teammate Dylan Dennis, as you can imagine, not everyone was thrilled with him for bringing so much negative attention on such a massive event. Khabib, to put it simply, wasn't willing to take all of McGregor's verbal barbs without some payback. And with him being the man of principle that he is, his decision was one that he stands behind to this day. All in all, it was a pretty incredible spectacle, whether you agree with it or not, but in the event's immediate aftermath, more than a few fighters voiced their belief that it was not a good look for the sport. And in the aftermath of UFC 229, it was the most talked about story in sports. And while any publicity is good publicity, when it came to this post-fight incident, we're not too sure about that. Number 7. Ties to Ramzan Kadyrov. Khabib's long-standing link to the Chechen warlord Ramzan Kadyrov has been a constant source of controversy through his entire time spent in the mainstream eye. Now, in recent years, the pair have seemingly had something of a falling out, as the divisive Kadyrov instead opts to favor a friendship with Khamzat Chimaev. But with numerous human rights violations and widely condemned viewpoints in his history, Kadyrov and his associates are a major source of criticism within the MMA world. In fairness to him, Khabib likely didn't have too much of a choice in the matter, as he risked angering an incredibly powerful public figure if he shunned him. But for many MMA fighters, even getting a photo taken with someone as problematic as the Chechen leader would be considered a major no-no. Number 6. Weight cutting. Khabib, unlike so many other great fighters, has never entertained the idea of moving up in weight to 170 pounds, instead opting to maintain a run at lightweight. And though he is well within his rights to do so, his issues on the scale earlier in his career led many of his fellow fighters to suggest that he was too fixated on taking every weight advantage possible over his fellow lightweights, rather than coming in undersized at welterweight. And of course, that's his freedom. But in a sport that is built around a certain level of fighting honor, when his fellow UFC stars see him cutting down from 185 pounds or above, you can see how they would paint that in their own minds. It is a great shame that we were never able to see the Eagle taking on the likes of Kamaru Usman, but unfortunately, his quick retirement left us all wanting a lot more from this legendary 155-pound champion. Remember, if you're enjoying our content and want to see more, be sure to leave a like before subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Number 5. His pre-UFC run. Take one look at the first 16 fights of Khabib's career and you will see some comically bad opponents littered throughout. 10 of Nurmagomedov's first 16 opponents did not actually have a winning record, and several of them were actually making their pro debuts against him. Now, of course, he puts all doubts over his abilities as an elite presence within the 155-pound division when he finally reached the top level. But as you can imagine, for his fellow fighters, hearing Khabib fans constantly pointing out the 29-0 record must be pretty frustrating when only 19 of those fighters actually had more wins than losses. It's not a real dig at Khabib's ability or his legacy, but in reality, it's still something that deserves to be mentioned. That 16-0 record he brought with him into the UFC debut sure does look pretty, but when you peel back the layers, it's pretty clear that looks can be deceiving. Number 4. Dominance MMA. Ali Abdelaziz is without question the most divisive manager in the sport today. However, it could also be said that he's probably the most successful too, playing the role of manager and pseudo-promoter to perfection. His fighters generally have a good history of getting big fights and title shots, and though all of those who fall under his wing have nothing but the highest level of praise for him, those who don't generally find his presence at any event to be tiresome. And for rivals of Khabib, hearing Abdelaziz playing the hype man to his fighter during any altercations or verbal exchanges that might happen is surely a major source of annoyance. Either you're on Team Ali or you're not. And for those who are not, we can see why you might dislike him quite a lot. When it comes to the owner and CEO of Dominance MMA, if you're not part of the team, you're likely angered by every mention of this unavoidable presence within the sport's headlines. Call it jealousy if you want, but it certainly makes sense when you stop and think about it. Number 3. His rivalry with Conor McGregor. Though most fighters have a strong opinion about Conor McGregor in one way or another, no athlete in the sport of mixed martial arts can boast a deeper connection to the Irishman than Khabib. The pair obviously shared one hell of a rivalry in the lead-up to their UFC 229 clash, where lines relating to culture, religion, and family were constantly crossed like they were nothing. But for the many fighters who consider Conor to be something of an inspiration, you can imagine that Nurmagomedov's position as his major nemesis puts him in line for quite a bit of hatred from his fellow MMA stars. It could be well said that there's never been a more venomous rivalry in MMA history than the one shared between these two. One that was just too vicious, too deep to write off as showmanship. And while a rematch is highly unlikely at this point in time, at least we will always have the memories, eh? Number 2. His disrespect of Tony Ferguson. If there's one thing that most MMA fans and fighters will agree on, it's that Tony Ferguson is unlike anything we've ever seen inside the octagon. A creative force of nature that doesn't have a single ounce of quit in him. This guy's ability to absorb punishment and keep moving forward is second to none. His ability to recover and fight out of seemingly no-win positions can't be beat. And though the world was deprived of a dream matchup between himself and Khabib, it didn't stop the pair from engaging in one of the most memorable rivalries of the era. And while of the two, Khabib is definitely the more popular fighter on a global level, those fighters who consider themselves fans of El Cucuy will have no doubt taken issue with Nurmagomedov's dismissive attitude towards Ferguson. Because while Khabib is never afraid to give props when he feels as though they are deserved, when it came to Tony, the Eagle always just seemed to call him a weirdo and move on. Say what you want about it being maybe competitive energy, but we always got the sense that Nurmagomedov never truly gave Ferguson the respect he had earned. Number 1. The Homeless Man. And finally, we come to one of the most controversial moments to be found within Khabib Nurmagomedov's career. The completely baffling viral video that was released showing the Eagle had a few of his friends paying a homeless man to do push-ups while openly laughing at him. And as much as many of Nurmagomedov's fans try to pass this off as their hero doing the man in question a favor, one look at the video will tell you that this isn't coming from a place of charity. And just as many of Khabib's detractors jumped on this incident quickly as proof that the seemingly angelic figure isn't as thoroughly good as we might have thought, no matter how you look at it, this was certainly a bad look for the lightweight legend, and one that left his reputation in less than a desirable place when the video went viral. As things stand, Nurmagomedov has never made any comments on the incident or attempted to make an apology. But if one thing is for certain, it's that he won't make the same mistakes again, that's for sure. And that will just about do it for this video. What do you think of the former UFC lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov? Again, if you enjoyed today's video and want to see more, be sure to leave a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you can stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. Thanks for watching.